Hi everybody, Father Peter here. Welcome to my weekly video log. Welcome to the lawn at the rectory. Welcome to the tree on my front lawn. I'd like to say a word this week about breathing. We just witnessed one of the most brutal murders that any of us can ever remember, the murder of George Floyd, and what ran out of George? His breath. I wonder if George could speak to us if he wouldn't say we should all just honor and give thanks to God for the fact that we can breathe. So I want to say a little bit about our breath and a little bit about our breath as prayers. We as human beings, the thing we all share is the fact that we're still breathing. Isn't that true? We come into the world with our first breath, and we say that we leave this world with our last breath. Let's talk a little bit about breath as prayer. In our world today, we hear a lot about mindfulness, and mindfulness is the most beautiful thing, right? About coming to your breath and coming to be present to the present, because we like to say that God can only be met in the present. But I will say there's another thing besides just mindfulness. The problem with mindfulness, it might leave you in your mind. Let's talk a little bit about mindfulness as prayerfulness, breath as prayer. And it's a good time for us to be speaking about breath as prayer, since we just had the Feast of Pentecost, the Feast of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit, of course, is the Spirit of breath, the Spirit of God's breath. And St. Paul tells us in Romans 8, of course, that we do not know how to pray, but the Spirit prays within us with sighs too deep for words. In other words, we are always at a soulful level in a kind of breathing prayer. And when we set our intention, our time of peace, our time of gathering in as prayer, just breathing can become a prayer. The Lord knows it is a prayer. Now, there's no question we have been through and are in the midst of monumental stress. I mean, the list is just crazy, is it not? The worries about the pandemics, the loss of that, economic stress, racial stress, which has been burst forth into our world. So many things, one thing after anotherness, making it difficult for us. My dad had cancer many, many years ago, and when his cancer was diagnosed, my mother basically stopped breathing. I think she held her breath for 20 years because she was so stressed. When we get stressed, we stop flowing, right? We have a muscle that literally cuts right across us, and that muscle tightens up, and we begin to chest breathe rather than to belly breathe as a baby breathes. Several years ago when I was on sabbatical, I was at this Bikram yoga studio in Paris, and I'll never forget the yogi. Remember, he didn't wear shoes on the streets of Paris. And after we got out of class, he was talking to Jennifer, and I was sitting next to Jennifer, and he was talking about me as though I wasn't there. And he said, Peter's a strong guy. He's trying to lead with his muscle. He'll make no progress. He needs to lead with his breath. And I'd like to say that about the times we're in. These are crazy times, and sometimes we feel like we have to fight them just to feel centered and whole in our being and in our bodies and in our prayer lives. But how about we not lead with our spiritual muscle? How about we lead with our spiritual breath? Spiritual breathing is not about effort. It's more about letting go, right? It's about letting the belly out. It's less about doing and more about allowing. It's about creating space. And so you'll see in all the teachings, East and West, about meditation, the necessity and the desire to have an upright torso. And what we're doing is we're essentially creating a cavern, an interior space for this breath of God to flow in us. And when you're breathing in your quietude, you can always begin, of course, with feeling your breath come in and out of your nose or this area above your lip. But I would suggest, instead of spending a lot of time there, you begin to let go so that the breath comes in the front, up in the top, and you have a sense that it comes down your backbone, through your buttocks, and then up and out. And so in with the breath of God, out with letting go. In with the breath of God, out with letting go. And as you're beginning to develop this rhythm and letting the breath make its way, you're not muscling into the fullness of your being, the fullness of your body, connecting mind, body, and soul. You're letting your breath lead the way. Do not need to push your breath down into your torso. Just let it go and let it in. Then you get into the question, well, what am I supposed to do with my hands while I'm breathing? Well, there's so many things you can do with your hands to make your hands prayerful. Hands like this, of course, are grounding hands. This is like saying, Lord, I have shown up and I am grounded, just as I might sit on the ground in order to be grounded in prayer. Or otherwise, you might put your hands upward so that you are open for business, right? I'm open to receive. Of course, our classic Christian form of prayer is this, is it not? And here we are connecting left and right, mind, body, and soul. Or perhaps you might want to take another what in yoga is known as a mudra. And if you're feeling particularly disconnected, putting your hands together, and then you might even just hold up your knee and just look at the connection between your fingers. And you'd be amazed by how this begins to pull your disconnectedness back to connectedness. Because what we're trying to do is to come before God as a whole human being so that God's holiness might enter into us. Not because we're muscling it, but because we're letting go and we're allowing that to come into our body, into our flow, and letting our hands find their place. Some people like to pray like this, as though their hands are a lotus. Some people like to raise up their prayers, the arrow prayers to God, Lord, take care of me, or the prayer to what in the yogic world is known as the third eye, the spiritual imagination, the spiritual eyesight, or Lord, my heart is troubled, to put your prayer literally on your heart. So let your prayers, let your hands move and let them find their place. And then settle down. So many of you know that I love the mantra Maranatha. Maranatha being an early greeting, of course. It's in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, I think in the 16th chapter, when he greets as Maranatha. Maranatha, something like Shalom in Hebrew. And also Maranatha, the last prayer in the New Testament. It's a come Lord prayer. It is a prayer to receive the Lord's presence, which is already here. It's just our tuning ourselves to the Lord. Now, you can hook up ma, ra, na, tha with your breath, or you cannot. Either or, all good. I'd also like you to ponder the possibility of using Psalm 46:10 as your prayer. So as you settle down, you settle in, your prayer finds a place, you're upright in your torso, you've spent some time with your breath, and you know this, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Remembering that I am is the name that God gives in the book of Exodus to Moses and is used 7 times in John's Gospel, the great sayings of Jesus, I am. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Then be still and know, and then be still, and then be. For the purpose of our meditation is simply to be. And in these days where we are so torn apart by the things in our world that are so distressing, and sometimes we're so dissipated with our energy shooting out all over the place, and sometimes what we see is great division in our world, this, just being, is a way to bring it all into a unity within yourself. For all things are one in God, and when we are in God, we are one. It's a path that we can all take. All you need to do, find a place to be grounded, see if you can get your torso upright, get your hands settled where they need to be, and then don't fuss with them. Start with your breath, and then find your mantra, find your breath, or maybe just be still and know that God is God. This is a time for us to stay deeply grounded. It's a time for us to stay deeply together. The world is a fast-moving place. It's a rough and tumble spot. But you do not need to be bounced all over. Sit down and let the Lord do the Lord's work in you. So peace be with you. Happy breathing. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.